So I'm calling the meeting to order at my watch shows a 6:05.
Casey, can I get share screen option?
Okay. We do have to go through the Pledge of the Allegiance and the Goethe Pledge. Dr. Jones, would you kindly bring us to the Pledge of the Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As a citizen of the world, I will follow Goethe's circle of learning. Curiosity opens my mind, ideas lead to knowledge, responsible choices show respect, cooperation strengthens others, learners are courageous, empathy creates community.
Als ein Bürger dieser Welt folge ich dem Kreis des Lernens, neugierig, ideenreich, respektvoll, kooperativ, mutig, empathisch.
Como ciudadano del mundo, seguiré el círculo del aprendizaje, creatividad, ideas, respeto, colaboración, valor, empatía.
Thank you. Item number 1C, roll call. Julian will be coming later. Frank, I'm present. Sam?
Here.
Pete?
I'm here.
Katrin?
Here.
Okay. We're coming to item number 2, Roman numeral affirmation of board findings pursuant to the Government Code section 54953E. Do I have a I move, do I have a second?
Second, this is Sam.
Yeah, would you please, Dr. Jones, bring us up to speed on that item, and then I'll make the roll call.
Sure. This is something we've been doing monthly. It's an affirmation of the safety of doing a virtual meeting like this, and we are able to do it under the code of law, and so that is what we are recommending we continue doing at this time.
Good. Then if there are any discussion. I don't hear any discussion. All in favor? It's an aye from myself. Sam?
Aye.
Pete?
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Item number 3, approval of agenda as presented. I move. Do I have a second?
I second, this is Sam.
Sam seconds. Thank you. Any discussion about the agenda? I interpret your silence as approval. Therefore, the roll call. It's an aye for myself. Sam?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
And Katrin?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Item number 4, public comment on general items in the board jurisdictions, 30 minutes, but not more than 3 individual items. Is there public comment, Casey?
Would you like me to read through the blurb?
I think it's on the, I don't think we need to at this stage, but it's posted. So is there any public comment?
So as a reminder, if anyone wants to make public comment, use the raise hand tool. But I do not see any public comment at this time.
Good, we'll table it with the public wants to chime in later. We have 30 minutes. We have item number 5, consent items. There are 2 separate approvals. We do A. It doesn't require a second. Approval, I move. And the item is approval of the special board meeting minutes of March 19th, 2022. No second required. All in favor? It's an aye for me. Sam?
Aye.
Pete?
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
So I apologize for putting my name up there always first, but I'm going down the list. So please don't take this as my as self-absorbance, right? Item number B, approval of the regular board meeting minutes of March 21st, 2022. I move. All in favor, Sam,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
It's an aye for myself. Motion carries as well. Item number 6, items for information, discussion, and actions. There is, at this stage, item A, executive director report. Dr. Chris Jones, 30 minutes, a presentation. Your floor.
Okay. Well, I hope everyone had a spring break of sorts. I realize not everyone gets a spring break. I also wish to thank the work of Biggie. Quite frankly, worked right through the break. There was much to be done, and I want to publicly recognize the work that she did on that. The items in the ED report, we always start with enrollment and include the lottery as a part of that. So we basically held steady since last month. We know we had an original budget based on 424. We've been right around 380 for the bulk of the year, and it was no change from last month. But importantly, we did conduct the lottery with 207 applications, and there was a request to look at where did that compare to last year. That number was 175 last year. So we're happy of that the numbers increased, but also kind of where those numbers were, because the lottery applications that we got do support the budget enrollment projections that we had been looking at, and what we had put into essentially what we'd put into our Prop 39 application way back in November, and what we've been kind of projecting out. So the specifics of it are right here, and you can kind of see where we stand to get our 380. But also where those 207 lottery applications came in. I'd like to point out a couple of things. They really bulk around our entry points, and our entry points are at TK and kindergarten. And TK is going to be an expanding one in the coming years as the TK deadline for being eligible, or the eligibility date on TK, rolls back a little bit and includes more and more 4-year-olds. But our TK and K numbers are looking strong at this point. And the other one that I think is really worth note is 6th grade. Last year we had 13 at this time. This year 23. Students applying from the outside for 6th grade. And we also have a larger number that are showing an intent to return from our 5th grade than we've had in any previous year. So that has implications, obviously, of the number of classes we'd be offering at 6th grade. So we're looking at going from 1 class to 2 classes. And at the TKK levels, we're looking at a TK standalone class and 2 kindergartens. And we think that that really sets us up for future enrollment. So that piece is looking good. We are tracking, of course, we've made offers. Now we have to get those people in and keep in contact with them to make sure that they are here on the opening day of school in August.
So Dr. Jones, do you want to manage your own question and answers? I highly recommend you do, and not me interfering in your presentation.
Sure. And I can just pause there and ask any questions about enrollment. Then I'll roll forward because it ties right into where do we stand with facilities. Prop 39, first of all, we did receive our April 1 preliminary offer. We will be responding with our May 1 final offer, final acceptance. So that is coming up, and we're planning and preparing for that. We did get exactly the same offer as we received in a year ago in 2021, and so that's fairly significant in that the offer is for 15 classrooms plus 2 special education rooms plus 1 administrative room. And so that's basically the footprint we have now, minus the 2 classes that we got through an alternate agreement, if you recall, last August. So we are trying very hard not to be waiting around until August to get an alternative agreement. And as a result, we've been pushing both politically through our Nick Melvoin's office and in contacting locally on the site and contacting local district West as well. So far, they are doing what they did last year, which is saying, no, not at this time. And we are, so that's exactly the same position we were in. The good news is they did come and visit us on the site and took a visual inventory. So people from local district West came and we walked through every classroom and showed them exactly what we use it for, that there's no, hidden rooms or rooms that are not being used for direct instruction. And so that was good. They came literally on I think it was April 2nd. So they came right after the April 1st letter was given. And so but at this point, they're saying they're waiting for completion of their fall planning, which they say should be in the month of May. And so, which is better than where we were last year, where we didn't get an answer until August. We're going to continue to push on this front. We also want to see if there is any other option that we have. And the one place that there is some potential, and I say some because this is not a slam dunk that it could happen. It is not a slam dunk politically or anything else, to be able to get use of a few of the classrooms in the old Ocean Charter site. And that is the church property that is on Culver. And it's on the angle between Culver and Braddock. We've actually had a chance to take a tour of that campus, and it has been unused for 2 years since Ocean left. It is in really, really poor condition. It is not move-in ready. It is really in a bad state. To be able to use there are like 2 classrooms that are in a little better shape than others, but that would require a material revision on our part. And significant tenant improvements that we would be paying for on our end. So it is something that I want to look at the options with that, and it's something we'll be bringing into a closed session, because it'll be a negotiation to be able to do that. So that is on our closed session item today. Any questions on facilities? Okay, and I'll keep on moving us forward. Just marketing and outreach. I did mention that lottery applications being up from 175 last year to 207. That's a nice jump, and I think we can build that even more as we build in future years. It's been a strange year in terms of marketing and lots of things. One of the things that the board had asked us to do is to update the enrollment process that we do, and to bring it more into an online system. So that is currently underway. We're moving. We found a way of doing this that is far less costly than what we had been originally banking on, which was there's a full implementation program through PowerSchool that was about 3 times the cost of what we ended up selecting, which was it's called Enrollment Express, and it allows us to put our all of our enrollment packet online to be able to be filled out that way, and then to be transferred over into the PowerSchool system. So it's connected with PowerSchool, which is our student information system. And so we'll be rolling that out as we start for next year. So in August, the plan is that will be all new applications coming in that way. We have been tracking our website basically through our partnership with Niche. And we found when we started out with Niche a huge increase in our tracked website that happened. And that was back in 2021. So in 2020, 2021. But we found this year a decline in our website usage, and we're not totally sure where that went, but there was a decline or a drop off in our web traffic, and we are considering whether the niche contract is really paying off for us. I asked Niche to do a more in-depth explanation of why this was the case, and meeting with them next week. And if there's not a really good answer on that, we probably would cut that contract from our budget in moving forward. We are looking at another tool, and it was Pete who gave us this name. So thank you, Pete. When I was at the CCSA conference, followed up with the folks that were there, and this is basically a program or a company called Schola, and it does some things similarly to Niche, but it's has a different focus, and it's more about tracking your leads and then nurturing those leads until they actually come across as enrollment. And they have a whole variety of free tools that we could begin using. And so that's really kind of, I think, our next direction is looking at how can we make use of the free pieces that are in Schola, which allow us to load in like all the students who are we do tours with, and to be able to track them and have a system wide where multiple people in our team can all do the tracking together. And so that's something that I think is a direction we should be looking at. And the consideration of the more costly piece, and this is very costly. So whereas the niche contract was about $4,000 per year, the Schola contract is about $3,500 per month to do their full contract. But they also provide a hands-on service that we'd have to interconnect with what we do. So I don't think we're ready for that, and I don't think there's a need for it yet. But if we're to meet long-term enrollment numbers like we were talking about, to have that growth and to build into a facility, we're going to need to turn it into high gear. And I think this is maybe an opportunity for us to have a systematic way of approaching that. So that's where we're at with marketing and outreach. Any questions or thoughts on that?
Let's do the rounds. Anybody? Pete, Sam, Catherine. Let's go in that direction.
No questions. I was just checking some info to see about pricing, but otherwise, yeah, no questions.
Sam,
No questions right now.
Catherine.
Are we aware if there are any competitors that offer a similar kind of service compared to Schola?
That's a great question, and not exactly the way. Interestingly, we really have a niche, even though that's the other name of the other company. They in that what they're doing is they're very much tied to the charter world and tied to private schools, and that they're looking for people who are out and actively recruiting. And what the service that they provide is their own people who follow up and walk people through applications and all of that kind of thing in both Spanish and English. So that's something right now we rely totally 100% on Christiane. And it's an enormous part, and she does walk people through in both English and German. But this would be a way of augmenting that. And like I said, right at the moment, that's not our issue. But if we're to really increase our enrollment, this may be a service that we'd look at. So it's just in the exploratory phases. And while we're doing it, I thought we'd try their free stuff and see how that works and does that fit into our system.
Thank you, Chris.
So my question is, Chris, is there any negative implications from from rating perspective in the niche system by discontinuing their service?
That's what I hope to. That's my very question for them, and why I asked them to do a deeper dive, and to get me that answer, because I'm not seeing like it shot us up to a certain level, but we've added in some other things that I'm not sure it's possible for us to differentiate where niche fits and where some of the other things that we have added, the Google ads and the Facebook ads. And so the remarketing that niche does, I'm not sure is getting us really the bang for our buck.
Right,
But
we would still be rated on niche, right?
Yes, they can't change that. That's a separate, a separate setup of how they how they.
And there should be full transparency, not that they're like retaliatory behavior because we didn't renew the contract.
No, that would not be would not be kosher. Okay. I just wanted to add something before we get to our final piece, and that is academic calendar. Typically, last month we do our academic calendar. We are still awaiting for LAUSD to approve their calendar. So we know people are trying to figure out what are they doing over the summer and when does school come back. So we are going based on what we've submitted to our when we did our initial Prop 39 application, we had to put a calendar together that was tentative. And so the tentative date that we're looking at is Tuesday, August 16th for the first day of school. But we can't make that official. That calendar will be brought to the board. The assumption is May. And so we're just waiting for that calendar to be in place. And then finally, the last part of I want to give the update on our iReady testing that we did. If you recall, we had a beginning of the year test, we had a winter test, and now we have a spring test. It's not really an end of year test because the end of year test is CASP. So, but we took this at the end of March, and it does give us some idea of, are our kids progressing from where they started in the year? And so I'm going to turn this over first to Scott to talk about the overall, and then I will pass it along to Casey to talk more about our intervention piece and kind of what implications are there, as was asked for by the board when we brought this the last time. So I'm gonna, let me see, pull up this.
Can I ask one question? This was not posted prior to the meeting, right? Or just did I not see it?
It was in the
Folders?
it was in the yeah, in the ED report along with the PowerPoint.
Okay, then I just did not see it. I apologize. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I ready report. Okay, and Scott, is this one yours? Final
This is
report.
it.
Yes. Okay, go
All right.
ahead,
Hey,
and
everybody.
I'll scroll forward as we go.
So as Dr. Jones said, this is our final iReady administration. It is not the end of year assessment that'll be cast, but it's referred to as the end of year iReady on here. And what we really want to look at is how students have grown and progressed academically throughout this school year. If you'll remember, we implemented iReady in the middle of the year last year. So this is really our first full year of data and tracking student progress from when they started with us in August all the way through the end of the school year. So we're going to focus on where they were at the beginning and where they were when we finished the administration just before spring break. So we'll start with our reading scores by grade level. So if you look on the left graph here, and I'll remind you that there's sort of three categories here. The red are students who are performing on the assessment at 2 or more grade levels below where they should be. Yellow is 1 grade level below, and then students in green are on grade level or above. So you can see our beginning of the year reading assessment in August, early September, sort of where the distribution lied for each grade level. As another reminder, kindergarten cannot be 2 or more grade levels below. That's why you don't see any red, because there are no standards below that from which to measure. So what I want to do is compare that to our most recent administration, which is the right-hand side graph. And you can see that the number of students who are 2 or more grade levels below in every grade level has diminished. The students who are on or above grade level has greatly grown. And a lot of our students who were 2 or more grade levels below are now up in that 1 grade level below. So it's showing that our kiddos are making wonderful progress, especially post-COVID with all of the learning loss that was experienced across California and the country. So we're really proud of what our teachers and our students have achieved in their growth this school year. So to break it down.
Observation on the first one in 8th grade, right? When you just look at the green columns coming down.
Yeah.
Is it 7th grade? I think there's 7th grade. I mean, everything is reclassified from 2 and below, but I think the only one not coming down is their 7th grade level, right?
And that's because a lot of our students who were 2 or more grade levels below moved up into that 1 grade level below. So that's why you see the yellow's grown and the red is diminished.
Yeah, but the green hasn't come down, so which means that you know you haven't classified anybody upwards.
So we'll get to that on the next slide.
Okay, so.
So if we look at our reading scores by grade level, so these are students who are on or above grade level. On the left-hand side, you see the bar graph for the beginning of the year assessment, and then the right-hand side shows the percentage of students who are at or above grade level now. I've also provided the chart on the right-hand side that shows you the percentage of students who are on or above grade level at the beginning of the year versus the most recent administration. And we've seen growth in every grade level, except, as Frank said, in 7th grade. So what we need to do as a team, these results are fresh. We just finished before spring break. So the middle school team and I need to dive in and figure out what those factors are. If the test administration is accurate, and maybe there's some more data we can get to show growth. I spend time with those students and I find the data hard to believe. So it's going to take some digging into and figuring out what happened there. And if that's truly accurate, what we can do to help those kids. So just to break down reading scores, you can go next slide. Into our student groups. Same on the left-hand side, you have our beginning of the year students who are on or above grade level, and the right-hand side, the most recent administration with the percentages. As you can see, all of our students have made progress in each student group by race, ethnicity, English learner, special education, and economically disadvantaged. I particularly want to point out the gains that our students have made, our special education or students with disabilities have made. That has been one of our areas of focus over the last couple years. And our teachers are doing a really great job. And our RSP teacher, Mr. Greg or Mr. Alou, is doing a wonderful job working with our general ed classroom teachers to support those students. But you can also see that every student group has made growth throughout the school year. So I'll pause for a second, and before we move to math, take any questions on our reading scores in iReady.
So let's go, Pete. Pete, Sam, and Katrin.
So the only thing and maybe it's in a later graph, but I think the only thing I'd still be interested in seeing is if this graph, if these graphs could be broken down into an overall graph like you had in this slide, and a graph for students who've been at Goethe for, and you could pick at least 2 years or more, or at least 3 years or more, one of those two, just so we get a sense of what being at Goethe over time has done, because you have a bit of a commingling here of some new students, and then some students have been with us for a while. And, supposedly we'd like to see that being with Goethe for a while, those students demonstrate more progress or continued high achievement. So that'd be the one thing I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Sam?
Thanks. If we can go to the previous page. So here we see a lot of banding around like a high 60s or kind of a 2/3 grouping of the kids who are at or above grade level. Where do you typically benchmark the kids? Do you have any idea if this is similar to what you'd see in LAUSD? Is this a comparable type of test score? And then my second question has to do with the next page and the demographics. Clearly, we have some demographics within the school that need more help or need additional services, and is there a plan to target the groups? Like we see, the Hispanic or Latino students scoring a lot lower, the Black or African American students as well. Are there special targeted interventions happening for them to help bring up those as groupings to support the diversity of the school?
Both great questions. Chris, will you scroll up to the previous slide for a moment? I've worked with iReady at a couple schools previously, and iReady really markets itself, and I have actually seen this play out, that the end of the year or near end of year iReady assessments pretty closely correlate with how students will do on CASP. So these test results are really important for our teachers over the next few weeks to help to target and prepare our kids for the CASP. That being said, these numbers for reading are much higher than proficiency levels across California, Los Angeles, and LAUSD. And it mirrors what our CASP scores have been back when we took the CASP a few years ago in the past. So they pretty closely correlate with the benchmarks of where we've been over the past years. And they're higher than comparable schools in the area. Any, Casey or Chris, you want to chime in on that?
I just think I'd add that this particular CASP season is of very much importance to us. I don't like to live and die by the test score, yet this is one test, because we have not taken it for 2 years, that it's really important that our kids are able to show that the progress that we think that they're making. And I think that the expectation around the country is that scores are going to take a drop compared to where they were 3 years ago, per se, due to the pandemic. What my hope is that we don't take a major drop, and that that we're going to kind of hold steady. And the numbers here kind of indicate that. But again, you know, this is a new system for us, and we don't have a steady stream of CASP scores to be looking at. So this is now kind of like, here's where we start, and moving forward from here.
And then to your second question, Sam, on the next slide, Dr. Jones, we're really focusing on student progress over the course of the school year, regardless of what student group they're in, what ethnicity, what needs they have. And Casey will get into that afterwards, and how we're using our multiple data points, including iReady, to help target those students who need extra support, and what's being done and how effective that has been as well. So we're going to continue to identify and help support students who need a little bit of extra help, or a lot of extra help.
And I think the one exception there is specific support that we give with like English learners or special education, where those are clearly defined. But all of our other all the other areas are based on who's individually having the struggle, as opposed to grouping out. But yet we want to track this and see, is that being effective over time?
And a caveat, I agree, Dr. Jones, but even the English learner and special ed support is individualized, and students' individual education plans for special ed and ELs are at different levels, and we really target their reading, writing, listening, and speaking based on their needs. So that is individualized as well.
And the only thing I would add is that it's important that as a staff, we're looking at this too, because when we're looking at individual progress, we can see that our kids are moving forward, and so our kids that are getting the support they need are getting that, or needing support or getting what they need. But it's important to take that step back and look overall, because even though we have kids who are making really great progress, when we look at the percentages across different groups, it begs the question, what else do these kids need in these groups that aren't performing as high as some of the other groups that the other groups are getting? Is it texts that are in the classroom that they can connect with? Is it experiences that they can connect with? Is it the way that we're talking to our kids? And so all of that needs to be part of our data analysis and reflection that we're doing as a whole staff as well.
Sorry, can I kick in out of turn?
Okay, if you Pete, if you don't mind, I don't want to,
Okay.
with all due respect, let Katrin speak first, and then you do the second round.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
I just topical, so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Scott, sorry if you already answered this question. I think you may have. So do we compare this year's data to prior years? And if so, are we able to show the delta between the learning and growth that occurred in one year then to the next year?
Good question. Again, iReady was new for us. We started it in the middle of last school year. So we have limited data on which to compare apples to apples. In the past, we'd used Galileo, which is a little bit like comparing apples to oranges, but still gives us data on how students are doing with specific content area knowledge and skills. The question is now, how do we start tracking our groups? Do we track a cohort from kindergarten, first, second, and third and see how they're progressing? Are we tracking individual grade levels? So that's been something we've discussed in the past, and that's something that we're going to start doing as well, to track our cohorts and see how they're progressing through their grade levels and content area knowledge and skills.
I would say probably both are important, right? I think tracking a cohort certainly, but also perhaps just having sort of a spotlight on the school at a given point in time, right? Just to see how do kids learn in 2021? How do kids learn in 2022?
Yeah.
I think moving forward from this year, like this would be the first year we have what I would consider solid data. The first year of iReady from last year was, you know, a lot of learning curve stuff, but the numbers that are here now, that will be comparable as we move forward.
Katrin, follow-up question before we go to Pete.
No, Pete, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Pete, for I apologize.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. So I'll go in reverse order based on what we were just talking about. If you're going to track, tracking both is certainly good, and it provides you obviously different kinds of information. But what you would not want to do is only track grade level improvement, because what happens is, so for example, if you have a really great first grade cohort, and as they go through the subsequent grades, it makes improvement look really, oh, second grade's getting better, third grade's getting better. And really all you're doing is tracking one set of kids that happen to be getting better. So you don't want to do that by itself, but so doing both is definitely the way to go. But the comment I wanted to make was that, and this is where additional disaggregation of the data is useful. And I know your n sizes are pretty small, but for example, the Hispanic students the EL English learners tend to be the Hispanic students. And so what we might be interested in is what the Hispanic students who aren't ELs and how well they're doing, because there may not be a gap for those students at all. And to blatantly say that Hispanic students are doing poorly might miss the boat, because the real problem might be language issues. And once those are resolved, the Hispanic students are doing just as well as your everyone else, or your white kids. So, you know, it's the same thing. There's these confounding effects. So your African American and Black and your Hispanic students, those two groups tend to also be in the economic disadvantage group. So, you know, you have some conflating of things there. So sometimes it's good to, not sometimes, it's always good to disaggregate, to isolate the specific areas that you want to address. That was it. Thanks.
Yeah. So my question before, Yazir, we're going to hand it over to you when you're back at the next item, to item B by Goethe Parent Association. But let me finish this out from a process, and then it's your meeting. I thought oh, there you are. Yeah, if you don't mind. So going back to the other slide, and that goes along to the overall slide. So it's about the cohort. Right, when you look at the overall, you know, just looking at the pure numbers, 71. So there are two outliers in there, you know, the 8th grade and the 3rd grade. So it's either the cohort, or is there really like a step, a massive improvement intellectually from going from 3rd to 4th grade, right? And so is there something happen in the curriculum, or is it a continuum of learning, and that's just representative of that cohort? The 3rd grade is exceptionally clever? Or is there any underlying current that going from 3rd to 4th grade is really a massive step? I don't know. Just a question.
Again, remember the data this year is tempered a little bit by post-COVID.
Yep.
So I think as we start to get into next school year, we'll have a lot of those questions answered as we begin to administer the iReady.
Okay.
There's one other caveat that can happen, is sometimes the calibration between grade levels of the test itself can be a bigger jump from one grade level to the next than the following one. And so over time, again, we'll see patterns that we might see patterns that emerge, but definitely worth looking for.
Right. For example, there could be an effect that you go from 5th grade to 6th grade, and you go from classroom teaching to more subject teaching, right? And you change rooms and stuff like that. And that could be a displacement of learning, or some shape or form could have an impact on learning, right? So these impacts, I don't know, need to be normalized at one point in time when the data is getting better.
Yeah. And just a reminder, this is a real macro view. We've zoomed out on the data. What Casey and I are able to do is really zoom in and look at certain classrooms, certain groups of students, and target more. But for the board, this is just a pretty broad overview.
Yep.
What we're doing at the admin level and with the teaching teams is a lot more nuanced.
Yeah. Do you want to, okay, understood. Do you want to go to the math scores then, and then we have Kathy Casey, just
Yes.
report out.
All right. So math scores, as we know, across California and across the country are a little bit lower than reading scores. So again, on the left-hand side, you can see where our students were at the beginning of the school year iReady diagnostic in terms of 2 or more grade levels below, 1 grade level below, or on grade level. And then the most recent administration, which is the graph on the right-hand side, you can see that in every grade level, our students have made progress and gains in their content area knowledge and skills. Same data on math as we had for reading. By grade level, we have the beginning of the year assessments and the percentage of students who were on grade level, and then our most recent administration on the right-hand side. And like I said, we have seen gains in every grade level, which is wonderful. And those numbers on the right are really solid in terms of student math performance. And again, we're looking at growth. So where students came in at the beginning of the year to where they are now is pretty resounding with the most recent iReady administration. And I'll do the last slide so that we can ask questions on math. So again, broken down by our student groups. Same stuff, we can see that the students who are on or above grade level have increased in all of our student groups. And I'll just let you take a look at the graphs and percentages.
So while you're looking, I'm gonna, go by order again. Pete, Sam, Katrin.
So if you look on the national picture on this is that math was more impacted by the pandemic than was language arts.
Yes.
So we would expect and have seen students starting off at lower levels in lower levels of preparedness when entering school in the fall. So it makes sense that in the previous chart, the math performance in the beginning of the year assessment was quite low, probably suppressed more. So some of those gains, I mean, I'm not saying they're not good. I don't get me wrong, the gains are really good, but I just put some context around it that those gains are probably higher than you would see in a normal year because of the suppression of scores in math through the pandemic. The other thing to bear in mind is that, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a second ago in terms of what kind of growth you expect. Growth across subjects and tests has a very standard form to it, and it's asymptotic and curvilinear, so growth slows over grades. So the math is exhibiting that pretty clearly, that you would expect to see big growth in the early grades, and as the grades continue, as the grades get higher, growth is going to be smaller and smaller. Also, some of the data I've looked at, so these are all very consistent. Some of the data I've looked at is that littler kids are more impacted by the pandemic than bigger kids because they have less of a basis of knowledge to kind of pin to. So we would expect them to be more hurt by it. And so that's exactly why we see the beginning of year test to be really low for those kids. So all of these patterns are pretty consistent with what we'd expect to see. That notwithstanding, still you're demonstrating improvement, and that improvement is good. So I think that's good. The only thing that's a little concerning to me on the next chart is that we would have expected ELs to do relatively better in terms of well, actually they did. So that's actually, I mislooked for a second. So that's consistent as well. We would expect ELs to do better in math than in reading, because math is math and reading is reading, and that seems to have played out as well. So overall, I think a pretty good job based on the iReady stuff.
Sam, thank you, Pete.
Thanks. So I have a question. I think it relates both to math and to reading, kind of more generalized, that, clearly we have a concern of making sure that we have a good basis of bringing kids up to grade level, but is there also emphasis or investigation that happens with the kids that start off the year at or close to grade level, and making sure that they continue to advance as well, and to make sure that they have proper differentiation to keep them engaged, because, you know, that the green band could be big, right? It could be anyone who's at grade level or, you know, anywhere above. And so are we meeting their needs too and continuing to grow?
Yeah, I'll let Casey, if you want to speak a little about what we do in the PYP, and then I'll chime in on MYP.
Yeah, so, and this just kind of preview with the intervention, the thing that you can't really see in these charts is how much progress, how far above grade level some of these kids have gotten this year. Like with intervention, I have kids who have made 300% progress towards the expected goal that they were to achieve. So it's that part kind of sometimes can get lost when you're not looking at the individual numbers. But what's really great about the IB is because we're not following scripted curriculums across our subject areas, every content area is totally open to how far our teachers and our students can go in terms of learning and the activities that they've got. So within the elementary school, the teachers do lots of that small group work. So they've got their whole group mini lesson where they're going to introduce the concept. But then when kids are actually working, they're working at things that are differentiated based on their level. So you might have one group who's really going over just those foundational skills, whereas another group has already mastered those and is maybe already reading or doing math computations at 2 grade levels above. And so when they're working with them, they've got a more complex text still on the same topic or concept, but they're working at a level that's going to challenge them. Same with math. If we're working on addition, there might be kids who are working on single digit addition and some who are doing triple digit addition, and they're ready for that progress. So it's really, that's being at an IB school where we don't have to follow like everyone's working in this textbook on this page for this lesson, really opens it up so teachers can combine lots of different resources to meet the needs of their students for that particular concept in that particular year.
Thanks.
Well put. As a small middle school, we do a lot of the same in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The one thing I would add that we're also doing at middle school level is now that students are a little more mature, we're giving some choice in how they can show their knowledge and what sort of projects and activities and texts that they can use that meet their ability level to show that they've mastered those content area knowledge and skills. So a little bit more choice when they're older.
Katrin? Thank you, Scott.
No question. Thank you.
Yazir, you're here. You have heard part of the conversation. Any questions, comments?
I do not actually. I think they were pretty much covered by everyone here. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Frank.
Yeah. And then let's move over to the intervention part of it, right? I think that's the next point.
The last
Before
slide,
before Yazir has taken over. Okay, takeaways. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We've already gone over this, but just to sum it up, all of our students have shown growth this school year. We're really happy with that, especially post-COVID. And as we know, reading scores are always a little bit higher than math scores. And then our segue into our intervention is that our students who are below grade level and those students who are in those specific student groups, we're targeting them and giving them intervention and support. And Casey will talk a little bit about how we're doing that and the effectiveness of what we've been doing.
Thanks, Scott. So I've broken down the intervention data from our April administration of iReady, similarly to how Scott did it. So we'll look at ELA first, and then we'll go to math. For our intervention, remember, we've got several different types of intervention that we have in place this year. A little bit of a difference between our ELA intervention and our math intervention, which I'll go into. So for ELA, we have 96 students that are receiving intervention services, and that's across kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. And then there are 2 modes of intervention for language arts. We have small group pullout during the school day with a credentialed teacher. And then we also have support during the school day with our intervention instructional assistants. And so here you can see in the blue is the progress of students who were receiving intervention services from their August to January test administrations. And then in the green, it'll show you the progress from those students from January to March. You'll notice, if you're remembering back from numbers from when I presented earlier in the year in about the January data, I have only included students here who have been receiving intervention and tested all 3 testing periods. So we had a couple students who maybe were absent and didn't test the 3rd administration, or were here with us and receiving intervention for the 2nd and the 3rd, but maybe weren't here at the beginning of the year. So what you're looking at here are students who have been in intervention throughout the year and have tested all 3 times with iReady with us. So at the bottom of the chart, I've put the change in number of students in each group. So you can see we had 11 students who we dropped down in terms of the numbers who were in that really limited progress, that 0 to 25%. So we had 11 fewer students in that band. And then we similarly had 2 fewer and then 3 fewer in the next 2 growth placements. And then we had an increase of 7 students who made it to 76 to 100% progress towards their annual typical growth goal. And then in the meeting and exceeding their growth goal, we had 9 additional students in the second period for testing. Then when we look at the language arts intervention by each of those 2 service areas, so the small group, this is for our 1st and 2nd grade students. And as Pete pointed out just a couple minutes ago, we really had focused on those youngest students because we saw right at the beginning of the year, they were the most impacted by COVID and not being in-person school for the last year and a half. So our credentialed teacher works with these students in language arts twice a week, and she does small pull-out groups outside of the classroom using the materials that students are familiar with from their classroom, but really differentiated to their specific needs. So you can see same growth, sorry, my words are leaving me right now. The same graph as what I had before. So the blue shows the percentage of students who, excuse me, the number of students who were in each percentage band in terms of progress towards their growth goal from August to January. And then the green shows their progress from January to March. So again, you see in those lowest growth percentages, we had fewer students in those and more students in the higher progress towards their typical growth goal. So adding 5 students to that 76 to 100%. So we completely lost, we added a bunch of kids there, and then another student who met or exceeded their annual typical growth goal.
And these are the highest need students?
Yes. And then the group of students who received support from the instructional assistant during the school day is kind of that next tier of students. So our highest need is getting this small group pullout, and then that next level who's closer to being on grade level is getting the instructional support during the school day. Sometimes this looks like one-on-one where the IA is sitting with a student and helping them work through a task or a concept. Sometimes it's small group in the classroom. Really just depends on what the concept is, what the activity is, and what needs the students have. So we've got 80 students who are receiving this support, and this is across all grade levels. And again, we see that from August to January and then January to March, we have fewer students who are in that really limited percentage towards their growth and more students who are either meeting or exceeding. So we had 5 more students who were in that 76 to 100% progress towards their growth goal, and then an additional 7 students who met or increased that. And then when
Casey, some students could be receiving both interventions in ELA.
Yes. So here we have crossover. So some of the students might be getting their small group time pull out, and then during the school day also getting the IA support. Some of these students are only getting the IA support.
So that's to the point here, right? Because if you add them up, you had 96 and 80, right? If that would be a bad number. So you would have almost half the school, getting some support and not meeting class grades, right?
Yeah, so overall it was 96,
Yes, who are
But
receiving support.
25 are the most highest need.
Mhm.
Okay.
Then on to math.
And then just like with our school-wide results, we saw much greater progress with math than we did with ELA in terms of progress towards their annual typical growth goal. We had been focusing more on math for our students this year than on ELA. So there was the addition of the after-school tutoring with a credentialed teacher. That's on top of, again, the small group pullout with a credentialed teacher, and then the IA support throughout the school day. So we had 96 students receiving all or any or all of those services. And you can see we had 45 students who are now meeting or exceeding their growth goal. And then we had 20 who moved from that 0 to 25 band up to one of the others. You can go to the. So then when we break it down by service, again, we'll start with the small group. And you can see this again was focused on our students in the primary grades, kinder, first and second, who had the highest math needs. And there were 31 of these students, and you can see 10 of them, we had an increase of 10 who were meeting or exceeding their annual typical growth goal from the first half of the year to the second half of the year. And then the after school tutoring, this is a larger group of students. So this would be students who are not as high of a need as the small group pullout during the day, but more of a need than the students receiving just the intervention with an instructional assistant. So we had a group of 64 students. And again, this is across all grade levels. And they receive after school tutoring with one of our credentialed teachers. And again, we see really similar progress as we did with the small group, where we had a really big increase in the number of students who were meeting or exceeding their goal from the first half of the year to the second half of the year, and a decrease in those other areas. And then for our IA support, we've got a lot more kids who are receiving this. So we were serving 121 students during the school day with our instructional assistants. But again, we still see similar progress, where we have an increase of 36 more students who are meeting or exceeding their goal at this point of the year. And then a decrease in those other limited proficiency areas. And so when we look over this, I went through and looked at a couple different factors when going through the individual student data. So as we can see, more of our students had higher growth in both ELA and math than when we had measured their growth in January. So that's what we want to see. Math students were showing more growth in than ELA. And then one of the areas that I noted when I was looking through our students was I also looked at their attendance, which was one of the things that we had talked about when we were going over the January data. And we had a higher average number of absences in the groups that had that limited progress. So students who were in that 0 to 50% range tended to have higher absences than, there was a higher average number of absences than in the other groups. This is a combination of absences. So some of them are sick days that kids have. We had a lot of kids who had to be out on quarantine for COVID related reasons. And so those really added up and had an impact on their accessibility to being in school with their classroom teachers, receiving this intervention support as well. So our immediate next steps that we have been going through is looking at those students that have that limited progress and holding student success team meetings with them. So that's a meeting with the teachers and the parent or guardians, talking about here's the students' needs, this is where they are, this is the progress they've made, here's our plan for further growth with them. So really bringing in the family connection to help support students both at home and at school. Our Parent Advisory Committee also recently sent out a family survey that was specifically focused on at-home resources for families. And so we're working on refining the resources that we have available, especially for these students who are in highest need, to make sure that they have resources available to them, that they're easily accessible to them, and that they're effective for their needs at home. We're also doing summer school again this school year, and that is reserved, it'll be by invitation for our students who have the highest academic needs. So the ones who have been receiving intervention services or who have not been making adequate progress throughout this school year. When we look ahead to the upcoming school year, we have budgeted for continued intervention positions for both ELA and math. So both that pull-out method where students are getting their services outside of the classroom, but also the push-in intervention so they can be supporting students in the class as well. And we are starting in September a multi-tiered systems of support training for all of our staff. So our administration, our teachers, and our instructional assistants. And we're putting together a school-wide plan for how we're going to provide different levels of support for students across the subject areas at all grade levels. So what are the immediate steps that we go to? So all of our staff will be trained in that, and then we'll have lead teachers across each of the grades so like a lower primary, upper primary, and then a middle school that will work really closely with admin and the rest of the teaching teams. We also have planned for continued literacy training with our reading program, which is the Fontes and Pinnell system. And so we have an intervention system for that, where we will make sure, now that we've got some new staff, that everyone is up to date in their training and understanding of how to administer that specific intervention program, as well as how to more effectively use the curriculum resources we have for our Readers and Writers Workshop to support our kids throughout the school year. And I'll open it up for questions about intervention.
Pete, we do the same. Pete, Sam, Katrin, Yazir, and then myself.
I had a question, and then like you called my name and I forgot it, so I'm gonna pass.
If you think about it, we'll bring you back. Sam?
No questions, thanks.
Katrin?
No questions, but thank you. This was really informative, just getting a bit of insight into all the interventions that are happening at the school that I personally wasn't aware of to this extent.
Okay, thank you. Yazir?
No questions, thank you.
And my comment is, like, how many students do you think are not meeting? What is the projection now for how many students are not going to make class grade by the end of the school year? Do you have an idea about this, even with the intervention, like bringing these up to, of these, let's say the 36 who have been reclassified, like they are now have a growth goal of 100, but will they reach the academic goal of the year, right? So these 36 here, for example, just giving the number. Will all the students meet the minimum academic goal for the year?
Well, it's the short answer, no, they're not. Based on what we see with this data right now, like you can see, there are still students, even though we have 16 fewer in that 0 to 25% progress towards their typical growth goal, we still have students in those 0 to 25, 26 to 50, and even that 51 to 75. The 51 to 75 are kind of close to being there. But those three groups, we still have students in there. And so it's just looking at the amount of progress they have to go to meet their individual goal that likely won't happen in this last 2 months of school. But that
Right.
doesn't mean we're not going to keep pushing them forward. The other thing too is that each student's individual goal does not necessarily put them at grade level by the end of the year. So if you're 2 grade levels below, your growth goal might get you to be, only 1 grade level below by the end of this year. But it's not going to necessarily catch you up the 2. But then we've also seen, like I mentioned, we have students who are making 300% progress towards their growth goal. So there are some that are making even more than what is expected of them. But I think what's really important to note is that for those students who we know are not going to be at grade level or not making the progress that we expect them to, that we're not just stopping the intervention, but we're continuing that up through the last day of school, bringing them back for summer school, and then just keeping that progress and that push of support going through the summer and into the beginning of the next school year. What's really great about having this data is we already can see who these students are, so we can identify them and provide that support. But we're also going to administer, because our youngest students, kinder, first and second, don't take CASP, we're going to be giving them a final iReady at the end of the school year to serve as our end of year assessment for them, so that going into the summer, coming back from summer into next year, families know where their students are and what their needs are, and staff knows, so that even though we'll be doing the beginning of the year assessment, we have data for how students ended the previous year to immediately start supporting them on that first week of school.
So it would be interesting to see, after 1 year of cycling or the next year, how many students, what's the group of students who are not making class grade, right? It can't be that big, but it's probably below 20% of the overall school population, right? When you have like these learning, what did you call it? The PAC?
Yeah, the Parent Advisory Committee.
Yeah, no, the PAC, the advisory committee, and then you have like the in the plan going forward, like where you try to bring them up. So I think, it would be interesting to see how many of our students are not making class grade and who are at danger of not making class grade in the very, very early grade, because it's like a compounding impact going forward. So identify those and bring them up to speed and focus especially on those. And then, there could always be circumstances while somebody is falling off the learning track, but it would be interesting to see, especially to get all these kids here, that nobody's leaving the school, not at grade level, whenever they leave. So just like conceptually, but it can't be such a big group.
I just want to chime in real quickly, Frank, and say that we have that data, and we just went over it with our final, our most recent iReady results in terms of who's performing on or above grade level or not. And those are these students who we are targeting with these interventions. We're having student support teams with parents and teachers. And the multi-tiered system of support is super important because there are different factors for every student and every family. So really not only providing these supports, but individualizing the supports and partnering with parents and guardians to help is a huge part of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, my view is very mechanistic here. So it's like, like you want to get everybody to at least grade level. But anyway, we're belaboring the issue. With that, are there any further questions? If not, I'm going to hand over the meeting to Yazir.
I just had one follow-up question, because your question sort of the answer reminded me of the question. So we know that you said that growth goals are not based on grade level or proficiency standards, but it's based on something. And so what is that something?
So that's developed and provided by iReady itself. So when students do their September assessment, and it looks at where they are in their different areas against what the grade level expectation is, it uses all of the data that they have from administering this test to so many students across the country to determine what's a realistic growth goal for them for that year. How much progress can they be expected to make? And so that's provided by the program after students have taken their first test. Scott, anything, you're much more familiar with iReady and these processes, anything you can explain a little bit more clearly than that?
No, you explained it clearly. I think that's important to your point earlier, Pete, about how we need to cross-reference data and track cohorts and grade levels throughout the years. especially we have a couple middle school students who got a little bit savvy and realized, hey, if I don't try as hard on the first assessment, I'm going to make huge growth this school year. So also informing our parents and our students about the importance of this, about how there's no stakes. It's just for us to gather data, their teachers to gather data and help them is really important. So I think going forward, further educating our student population and our parent population on iReady and its usefulness is really important.
Yeah, you should offer them a pizza party for high scores in the beginning. See how that motivates them. As opposed to what other places do, where they say for the beginning of the year test, it's there's ice cream waiting, and the sooner you get done, you get it, and it's melting.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And with that, Yazir, your meeting, it is item 6B, Goethe Parent Association.
Thank you, Frank. All right, Allison, thank you for being so patient. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, I am happy to be here, and I was happy to be a fly on the wall for that discussion. It's good stuff to hear. So Parent Association, we have been meeting with the school in person. This is very exciting. We stopped having Zoom meetings. We've been meeting out on the front lawn, so we're not actually coming, into the campus, but kind of hanging out on the front lawn and having some refreshments and having in-person meetings. And we're looking forward to having another one of those coming up later this month. But that's been really great to reconnect with parents. We've also been hosting cafes in the same location on the front lawn of the school, and they've been really successful. So I think people are just happy to get out and see one another and also support the school. So that's been really great to raise some funds that way. We have another one coming up next week, and we'll be using a portion of the funds to support a catered lunch for Teacher and Staff Appreciation Week. And we'll be planning also items for each day that week. While I was listening fairly intently, I was also messaging with the others on the GPA exec team about the Teacher Appreciation Week. So there's lots of planning going on for that. It comes in the first week of May. We are also eagerly anticipating an in-person on-campus international flair at the end of the year. I think it's in the first week of June that we have it scheduled. So we're gonna really dive into the planning for that over the next month or so. And we'll see, specifically what that looks like. Can we do food and all the things that have generally come along with the in-person, or will we pare it back? That we're not sure of, but we do know, at least we intend, bearing any big changes, that we'll be having an in-person international flair, and we are really looking forward to that as well. So that's kind of the things that we have in the works right now. We will look forward to supporting the soiree and promoting that and getting that going on. Also, helping to support another garden cleanup that we hope comes along. The garden is actually looking really great. And it's been great to see people out there, and also some community folks out there helping. So we'll help to spread the word about that and support that as well. And then we'll be having elections coming up for next year. Year's almost over already. So that's what we have on the docket for the remainder of the year.
Thank you, Allison. Frank, any questions, comments?
Just thank you. Thank you for doing all that stuff. That's not a given that people volunteer their time and for the school. So as a former founder and having 3 kids going through the school, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's actually mostly really fun stuff.
Sam?
Thanks. So are there any areas where you think the GPA could use assistance from the board, or areas where the GPA has identified they want to assist the board?
I would say, honestly, I think that is an area worth exploring, how we can build on that in the future. I don't want to say, we've kind of been head down trying to figure out ways to bring back in-person events and digging into that this year. And that's been sort of the biggest area of focus. Firstly, keeping folks engaged in a virtual environment, and now, how to move to an in-person environment and host events and just build community that way. So that has been our primary focus, but I think that there probably are some ways that we can better support one another. And share more feedback specifically from the parent community. I think maybe that's helpful for you all. If there are ever occasions where feedback is desired about certain topics, I think we would be in a good position to gather that type of information and share it back. And I know there's some routine surveys that are done in the parent community, but I'm a researcher myself. I'm a mixed methods researcher, and so I think the qualitative stuff is sometimes very important also. So I think we could do some of that, and then I'll keep thinking about that. But it's a good question.
Pete?
I'm good, thank you.
Katrin?
No questions. Thank you.
Allison, just so you know, it's going to get a little bit tougher for you because I was going to tell you once it was official, but Chris wanted me to wait until Sam was officially the secretary. But we'd like to institute a little bit more formality into the organization since everything's kind of getting back to normal. So I think initially I'd mentioned to you, like, the GPA president, Chris and myself would have meetings, and we called it the executive council. I'd like the new secretary to also join in those meetings, but we couldn't do it this time. But definitely, we try to do it a week before the board meetings. And absolutely, exactly what you said, like, we're looking for input, feedback, how the board can support you, the organization. If you need Chris to shift to certain areas, we're there to listen and bring that forth back to the board for us to help if we can in any way. So really looking forward to it. I'm so excited about all the great things you guys are doing, and I'm glad to see it. Always a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thanks so much. We have a really great school community, so I think it's great to be supporting that and helping to even build it more.
Thank you, Allison. All right. If there's no other questions or comments, let's move to the Finance Committee report. I'd like to make a motion to approve the financials for March 2022. Do I have a second?
I second.
All right, Chris and Frank and Ryan, the floor is yours.
All right, we'll begin with the financials. I'm going to pull those up right now. And Ryan, if you would do us the honor of walking through those. All right, Ryan, are you there?
I am. Hello, everyone.
All right. And we'll move that into a little more visible. Okay, does that work?
Me this.
All right. You want to take us on a quick walk through the financials?
Sure. So these are our financials as of the close of March. Looking at enrollment, we have data through month 8. We had 380 students, had a 94.3% average daily attendance rate, which is less than our budgeted 95%. However, we still have some opportunity to get even more ADA through the independent study contracts that are outstanding. They come in after the fact, and once reconciled, we can recoup some of the missed ADA from the original reporting that was required by the reporting dates from LAUSD. So we do have opportunity to increase our average daily attendance through month 8. Moving on to the income statement, there wasn't a lot of a lot of changes as far as February to March. However, we did, I don't know if some board members recall, but this is the time of year where we have a pass-through adjustment between LACO and LAUSD. And you can see that the local control funding formula this month versus last month was lower by about 56K, and other local revenue was higher by about 59K. That's a adjustment for prior year in lieu of property taxes, where the money comes through one of those agencies and into another one. So there's no real impact to our budget model there. It's just basically a wash. What we also have, though, is additional fundraising that we're anticipating for this school year because of the money received for field trips for Astro Camp and Science Camp. That field trip and the expenses were not being reflected in the budget model. So we added in the expenses and the money that we received to offset those. And that's why we're seeing higher fundraising for the year on the revenue side.
And the net income is still at break even.
Yeah, the net income is still about break even. There is some opportunity, as I said, with average daily attendance to recoup some more revenue. And there's also some opportunities within our expenses to realize some savings that could transpire between now and the end of the school year. But we have not yet realized any of those potential savings on the expense side yet.
So we have some savings that are there. We also do have the one expense that we know about, which is the overallocation penalty, that if all 3 months are taken out, April, May, and June would be about $24,000, somewhere in that amount. So I think the savings you're talking about would more than offset that. I think we're still looking at a positive year-end result.
Okay. Year-end cash at the end of March was at just under $2 million, and we're forecasting year-end cash of $1.4 million with a $550,000 receivable at year-end. And those receivables typically come in the majority in the months of July and August. However, as of June 30th, they're still owed to us. So they come in a little bit later because we are paid on a lag.
There are no deferrals at this point anymore, though, correct?
There are no deferrals at this point anymore, and there is potential for even more funding if hold harmless passes.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little more in the budget discussion. Okay, were there any additional bullet points? This is the bullet points that we keep adding to throughout the year.
The only new bullet points had to do with increased revenue through fundraising for Astro Camp and Science Camp, and increased field trips to reflect those camps on the expense side
that you mentioned already. And then same thing down here.
Yeah, these bullet points are for the expenses. Yeah, it's the only one that we added was the 24,000 higher in field trips, which was offset by additional fundraising.
Okay.
Then I typically go to the check register next, and that's filtered from largest to smallest expense, and was reviewed by the finance committee prior to this meeting in detail.
We also reviewed the credit card statement.
Correct.
Yeah, we do that at each finance committee meeting.
California Credit Union number 0533.
Okay. All right, anything more on financials or any questions about this month?
Frank, if that's all right with you, I'll jump to Sam.
I have no question, thank you. No comments.
Thanks. I do have one question. There was a mention about the additional fundraising for the camps for the field trip. And I just wondered if there's more information about where that fundraising came from. Was it, from a donor? Was it special targeted fundraising that you did?
Sure, I can chime in on that. There were a couple of ways. First, we went straight to the parents that were sending kids, and we made a specific ask. And the majority of parents are able to do that and willing to do that. We do ask that if some are able to go a little beyond that, maybe do that amount and a half or double it, and that they could sponsor others. So that's another way in which we raise money. And then we also, thanks to the GPA, we targeted some of our Goethe Cafe funding and built some fundraising that happened organically around that. And so that's been added in as well. So we're taking a look at like AstroCamp is now finished, and so we're getting all of the final receipts put together, and Biggie is helping us to get that balanced out, and we'll know how we did if we got a little to the good or a little behind, but either way we were doing these trips because the kids need them, so we pushed forward on them.
Great, thanks.
Pete?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Katrin?
Nothing from me, thanks.
Moving on to the vote, all in favor to approve the financials for March 2022. Frank?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Pete?
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
It's a yes for me as well. Now we are at I would like to make a motion to ratify the second interim report. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, go ahead, Chris. All right, this is basically just a pro forma action we need to do because the second interim report is just based on the January financials that you guys have already approved. It was just put into a different format that Ryan put together, was reviewed by the Finance Committee and recommended for ratification because it's already been sent to LA Unified. So we would ask the board to ratify what they already approved from the January financials that became the second interim report. Ryan, did I explain that correctly?
Yeah, and just as a reminder, the reason why we're doing this now is a timing issue, because you all typically have your financials done sooner than other schools. So by the time you had your January done and we're already reviewing February, the second interim report wasn't even due yet or ready to be submitted. Because we have to use the SAC software and submit through that template. So that's why we're doing a second interim that had to do with January today on April 18th.
Thank you, Ryan. Anything else?
Yeah.
All right.
Just up for a ratification of what you've already approved.
All right, Frank, any questions, comments?
No questions, no comments.
Sam?
None for me.
Pete?
Nothing for me.
Katrin?
No, nothing from you.
All right, all in favor? Frank?
Aye.
Sam?
Yes.
Pete?
Yep.
Katrin?
Yes.
And it's a yes for me as well. All right, now it's up to the budget. Go ahead, Chris.
Right. I'm going to share the budget document, but it shows red. Don't panic on that. We are still in the preliminary stages. We have not seen the May revision and what that means, but I do want to give you an idea of where we stand right now, because we've been working through multiple meetings, mostly myself and Biggie and Ryan, but the admin team as well have been working through this. And where this leads us right now at about 360K to the not good, but we feel like we're going to get much closer to that a break-even spot as we get into the next round. So May is at the next board meeting is the important budget discussion. But to give you an idea of kind of where things stand right now, I just wanted to give you a few notes to look at. So that we are still in this preliminary stage because we're waiting for the governor's May revision. When we met in March, the board talked about, when we met at our special meeting, the importance of investing in our program and making sure that it's enticing to people so that we can grow enrollment, and that of course ties to facilities, which is the long-term goal, is to get us moving into a facility that we have control over. The current budget, although it's 360K to the negative right now, there are several factors that bring us closer. And if you notice on what I presented, the first year was in the red, but the second and the third years are not. They're in the positive. And part of that is due to, or the big part of it is due to enrollment and projections. But those enrollment projections are simply rolling forward where we stand for the current year and taking those and rolling them forward to the next. So it's not some like influx of kids at all grade levels or something like that. And so that's how we're setting this up in looking forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what is currently what I call baked into the budget. It's a part and it's in there, and then some things that are not yet baked in, some to the good, some to the not good, but that we need to be aware of. So let's start with what is in the budget that I shared that says we're at 360 negative right now. One is the STRS and PERS increases, which were costs we knew. Those are in there. And we also mentioned at our last meeting 2.8 for step and column employee compensation increases. So we have included that is part of the budget that's in there. The over allocation penalties, which is 98,000 in the year 22-23, that is in there. So that's a big chunk that we never had before. That is something that is baked into this budget. Our facilities costs. What is in there is the assumption that we have the 15 classrooms that we have been offered, and we have 2 additional classrooms through an alt agreement, which would be exactly what we have in the current year. And so that's what's baked into this. We also included in this an assistant principal position. We have not had that since we shifted around roles. And believe it or not, of all people, Ryan was the one who kept saying that you guys are understaffed for administration, because he's watching what's happening at other places, and he's seen the work levels that have gone into it. So that is something that we put into this, that we would be, as we roll out things like the multi-tiered systems of support and really bring back the more activities on campus that we haven't had this year. Those are things that would be a part of that position. It would be very focused on student support, student behavior, but as well, and interventions and all the different pieces that we're talking about. This would be a support. We also included the part-time intervention pull in, push out that we saw the results of today, and so that is a part of this. It is not it's not a full-time position, it's the part-time setup that we have currently, and that is what we have moving forward. We did include field trips, 1 per grade level, which was kind of where we had left off 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. So it'd be 1 field trip per grade level, and any other field trips at a grade level would have to be done through specific fundraising for that. We have in this budget continued the middle school exploratory program. And this again came from the conversations that the board had, particularly in March, about being sure we have a program that is interesting and draws. And so coding and robotics and fine and performing arts through PS Arts. So those are 2 different programs that we have currently this year that we want to keep and put in the budget next year. It costs more next year because in particular, we have 2 6th grades planned for next year. So any of these costs now, it's for more kids, more sections. There's also an offset that we do, which helps support our MYP program. And that is, we shifted the role of Frau Kasai, shifting to later years and focusing her skill set on middle school. She actually is trained for middle school and high school. And we've been backfilling that through, we did a K2 this year. We're looking to put it K3 for next year, again through PS Arts. So these are not cheap programs, but they are programs that make our school enticing and desirable at all different levels. We were very happy with the elementary support that occurred with PS Arts, as well as their program at the middle school level. And coding and robotics was really well received. So, and we invested some in the actual robots this year, so we'll be set for that. We also, in this budget, are looking at a professional development. So the Fountas and Pinnell literacy training, the MTSS training, and International Baccalaureate. A lot of this is funded through special funding that the board approved back in December. For professional development, but that is a big push of next year. So the things that are not in this budget that we need to be thinking about, to the good, there are some one-time carryover funds that we need to look at to offset some costs. So there's still some fine-tuning with regard to that. That we will be doing between Ryan and Biggie and myself. We also are hearing that the May revision looks to potentially have a larger COLA increase. Currently, it's at 5.3%, and that may go up. So we will know that fairly shortly. And that will be an important piece because that would be just straight more money coming in to help balance that number from 360 downward. Also, what Ryan mentioned, the potential for hold harmless legislation, which could be a game changer in terms of the budget, because we could stand, it depends on how they do it, but basically this is saying we'd be held harmless for the lack of enrollment and lack of attendance that occurred during this year during the pandemic. And this would not be just for our school or just for charter schools. It would be for all schools across the state of California. And this is, if it does occur, which indications are positive that this could happen, that it would happen probably as a trailer bill to the budget, which means we may not see it in the current year, but it would show up in next year. And so that is something that could be a balancing factor. We don't know what it'll mean for next year or the year after or the year after. It depends on what they do up in Sacramento. But this is a really important one. We're following it. CCSA is pushing hard for this. But it's not, as I said, it's not just a charter issue because all schools are affected by it. But charters are hit particularly hard because we do not get any kind of regular hold harmless as school districts do, which means school districts get a year. If they ever have declining enrollment, that year they can actually go back to the previous year and use those numbers, and they get paid for those numbers. Charter schools don't get that. So that is another thing that's up for discussion of will that happen for charter schools moving forward, which would be great. So more to come on that. I'll go through the final bullet points and then open up to questions. Additional fine tuning of internal expenditures. We have some things I mentioned, one, like $4,000 of the niche contract that we're going to look at closely, but there's other things that we're going to do some fine tuning to help bring costs down. There are some things that could be negative. One is if we get hit with an over allocation penalty. We'll know that in August. We probably will, if we get one, we will probably be fighting that. And we will, that may end up in mediation and a long-term thing. But I do want that out there that there is a potential because in fact we lost enrollment this year. So LA Unified doesn't need to charge that penalty, but as we know, they have a history now of charging that penalty, even though logic says everyone was hit with the same issues during the pandemic. The other things that we need to be thinking about, if we made a choice to go to an offsite facility or get a couple of classrooms, we would have to look at those costs and then put them into the budget. We would have to look at tenant improvements and how much that would cost. And it would require a material revision, and there's legal costs and things that go into that as well. Finally, an increase beyond the step and column, an increase to the salary scale is something I think we would want to consider if something like hold harmless comes through. So that's going to be a decision call at a later point. And then finally, the question of increase in health benefits, which is not as big of a cost, but we were thinking about if there's a way to bump that up $50 a month from $700 to $750, that would keep a lot of people from having any out-of-pocket cost for single use. So those are things that we still need to be thinking about. We'll head into the thick of it in May. We'll know the revision by the time we meet again, and we will have a next round that'll be more solidified and hopefully a little bit more in line towards a balanced budget. All right, any questions or comments?
I think there's a lot. Frank,
I'll bet.
you wanna start it?
Well, I've been part of that. Let me go on video here. So I've been part of that conversation, right, on the finance committee meeting. This is a little bit more precise already than it was last Wednesday. I think overall as a board, we committed ourselves in the board retreat to invest into the program and into the school in order to just get out of this dilemma with the shortening of, we just need to increase our enrollment. And so what we need to get our head around it is like, how much are we willing to invest in this year? You know, assuming that we, you know, if investment, you know, you got to spend some money to make some money. How much are we willing to risk of our reserves in order for this year to, if we can't balance the budget, right? Because I think it's at this 360 plus a couple of other things we need to do. You know, we might be at that range. So that's one item for as a comment. And then the second item is, what do we foresee in simulation here? What do we want to see in simulation? How this looks like based on enrollment, you know, what are the expectations of the board, which we need to bring as a finance committee, we need to bring forward for decision making. Point budget, certain enrollment, various other variations thereof, and what would happen if it's not the 424 students, if it is 380 like this year, what would be the next step? So how do you envision this? These are my two comments and questions.
Thank you, Frank. Sam?
Thanks. I think a bit to Frank's point, you know, if there are things that we want to prioritize in the budget, or if there are things that we think are important to highlight, I think, you know, while I agree, we did commit that we think we need to get some investments in. We need to make sure that we're trying to invest in the future of the school and growing enrollment, because that's really the only way that we think that we'll be able to really grow into a different facility and really capture a better vision of the school. But I think it's also important for me to see how we can really prioritize including something in there for that, for increasing staff retention that isn't just contingent on whether or not the hold harmless comes through, and you know, what types of trade-offs we might need to make in the budget to make sure that we're focusing on retention of the staff that we have as we continue to try to grow the school.
Thank you, Sam. Pete?
So I guess two things. One, in terms of what kind of modeling I'd like to see. I'd like to see this. I think by students, of course, that's a given. I think obviously because there's different ramifications for assuming 420 students versus 400 students, for example. But I think even specifically the elements of this table, I'd kind of like to, well, it's elements of this list, and I'd kind of like to see it as a table where each one of these points here are categorized as either being something that's aligned with the number of students that we have, with students specifically. I'll give an example in a second. Or two is directly supportive of in-classroom instruction, or three is just kind of administrative overhead. Because I think that helps prioritize, and I'm not at this point making comments on how to prioritize, but I think that would make prioritization easier. So for example, something that's directly related to students, there was something, the robotics thing. So that's sort of said, well, there was going to be an increase in expenditures on the robotics thing, but that's tied directly to the increase in the number of students. The number of students bring in revenue, and so this should be a net benefit to have this. This is not a net cost because it's directly tied to the number of students you have. So if you had 10 students, again, there'd be there wouldn't be the same cost as if you had 20 students. So that's a different kind of that to me is a direct investment into the program. So I think viewing those things that align with the students is different than the other categories. And then, so that's what I'd like to see, is some classification that will help in the prioritization. But the one thing that sticks out to me, especially at this point, is the assistant principal position. I think there's no way that can be justified with the few number of students that we have. I don't I agree that the administrative staff is working very hard, but I think both in terms of budget priorities and in terms of optics, to continue to add administrative staff when you have reducing number of students is just a absolutely unfounded way of running a school, both fiscally and in terms of the optics it presents, that says you're pinching pennies in terms of what you might do in terms of increases or health benefits for teachers, but you're willing to hire another position to make life easier for your administration, which is basically like giving them a raise. And I'm not saying it's not a deserved raise or that the task that they do isn't a lot. I'm just saying that this is not the year that should be taking place. So those are my 2 comments.
Thank you, Pete. Katrin?
Thanks, Yasir. I'm kind of still thinking about this, and also just Pete's comment from just now.
We can come back to you too.
Yeah, I'll punt. Thank
okay.
you.
I very much appreciate the work you guys do. I want to reiterate what Pete said as far as the fact that we know it's hard. And I think that the term that Pete's trying to get into is cost neutral, right? I think the board is always going to be engaged in investing in the organization to bring anything that's cost neutral. So whether that's marketing efforts, whether that's, addition to the program, whether it's coding, whether it's additional things that brings in an increase in enrollment, we are much more, at least I'm much more keen on listening to those points and structuring around the model of the organization, which is reaching more children, educating more children in a powerful and a meaningful way. I'm glad to see this draft. I think it's great. I think the models are better. Me, I'm always criticizing you guys for your financial models, but I do have to say, to reiterate Pete's point about the assistant principal, our enrollment has dropped by 10 to 15%. It's and not to say that not everyone is working hard, but if there was, I'm all about justification, right? So when I had approved budgets and someone would say, okay, look, this is what this is our customer treatment plan, John is, responsible for 20 customers, and this was what his load was, and this was his salary and whatever, but now he's doing 60. Let's have a conversation. Okay, do we increase his salary? Is he efficient, or do we hire someone else to support John? You know what I mean? So anytime you add staff to a position, there has to be some sort of justification that says, this is where we are, this is what we're doing, this is what we could be doing. And also we want to keep everyone that's, I know, Chris, sorry, you're bald, but we want to keep everyone else's hair. You know what I mean? We want to make sure everyone is productive and happy, right? So I'm willing to have discussions on additions to staff, teachers, whatever it takes. I just got to see a little bit more justification behind it. So
I would say,
I will go back to Frank and we'll do another round. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, so I think, what you were referring to is a cost benefit analysis of the individual kind of if we do this, cost neutral. If that means we're investing this and it's on marginal costing basis, we're investing 2,000 and it generates this X. That's going to be hard to show, but conceivable. But it's conceivable to show that. But what I'm trying to say is, it requires a cost benefit analysis and it requires a prioritization. This is an early wish list, right? But if an assistant principal position, if the case can be made for of reshuffling the deck, let's keep an open mind on this one, right? Reshuffling the deck of tasks. So we need to keep an open mind to make this organization more effective. But I will just reiterate, it's going to be hard. We need to determine a certain risk tolerance of what we're willing to risk under certain circumstances, right? how much are we willing to risk of our safety cushion, or safety cushion here, in order to grow the school. I don't think we can. I think we're going to have a hard time showing a balanced budget if we want to do a couple of those things. Just my gut feeling at this point. Could be in for a surprise.
Thank you, Frank. Sam?
And nothing more right now.
Pete?
I'm good for the moment.
Katrin?
Nothing, thanks.
Again, Chris and Ryan and everyone on the finance committee, I just, not to belabor it, but to reiterate, like, how do I put this? Like, if another person on the leadership team results in this, right? And like Scott and Casey and Biggie are free to do this, right? Like, just to see that justification, right? We're going to talk about facilities a little bit later. I think that needs to be, everyone needs to be cognizant of that, right? Like, we are looking at an expansion of this many kids, or we're looking for an expansion of this many of this kind of program. And in order to deliver a quality program, which we, granted the enrollment's down, but maybe we'll go back up, like, stand by it and defend it and say it's going to be a better program with another, person on the leadership team. And we'll poke holes into it then. But thank you for bringing it. I think generally the feedback from the board has been positive. So good work. That is all. Let us move on to the next item, which is the draft strategic plan. Chris, go for it.
Okay. All right. So this plan was shared earlier in the year, and we spent a good amount of time looking through it at our special meeting in March. That was initially planned for January, and then Omicron hit, and so we pushed that back. And this was the initial document that we had. And so to make it simpler, what was in your Dropbox was changes that were recommended from the last time. We'll have another chance today to look at it and can make adjustments or shifts. And our hope is to bring this back in June, one of the June meetings for finalization. And approval. So we have a chance to look at it now. We could look at it again in May, but the goal is to get it completed in June. So I'm going to go through what were the suggestions from the last time. And this was the who are we, who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And the only addition was wanting to get the word diverse in. So we are a dynamic, collaborative, and diverse community that celebrates international cultures. And that, and then the other parts looked good. So we kept that where it was. We did not make any changes. This was the work of the committee. But the strategic goals, there was a request to shift around the order of the goals, feeling that academic still maintaining the first level, but that the facilities needed to be up there, and we dropped finances down to the bottom based on discussion. One of the major pieces was finding or stating an issue that relates to these goals. Like, why is this an important part for our school to be looking at? What's the issue here? And so based on the feedback that I heard, I put down the kind of what are the major issues. So this is new language that was here and is up for any kind of review or discussion. But under academics, I put student success is a top priority for GICS, yet our recent academic results showed a decline. And by recent, I'm talking about 2019 is the most recent CASP results. Standardized test results should reflect the learning that takes place for all students in an international baccalaureate classroom. So that's just sort of a broad issue statement for that entry level or that area. And then this was a request very specifically that we add a bullet that the expectation is we are going to clarify and broadcast vision for the middle school program, including exploratory language and sports. And so that be fleshed out as one of the bullet requirements under academics. Under facilities, the issue that GICS is currently on a year-to-year cycle under Prop 39 for a co-located facility. While Prop 39 allows for campus space that is lower than market value, the limitations on enrollment growth and political volatility of co-location have made it undesirable for long-term campus solution. Hopefully that grasps the issue there. Under marketing, put the issue as marketing for GICS has largely been driven by a positive word of mouth, but name recognition is low beyond our immediate local area. And that's been an issue for since 2009. A couple of things that the board suggested adding is monitor effectiveness of strategies of the marketing and media plan and adjust resources accordingly. And to establish market research of surrounding area schools and offerings and programs, which we did a little bit of in the strategic planning committee. We developed a comparison of schools, and that could be fleshed out even more moving forward. The other was to market to potential employees and make GICS an employer of choice, and we need to get out there and be marketing and draw employees to our school. And we know it's a difficult time right now, but that's in the long-term plan. And then under finances, the issue being the budget for GICS has been built on a static enrollment level that has limited sustained growth in program development. So it ties again to enrollment, and that's the financial issue we've been facing is not growing. So those were the additions that the board had asked for from our last round based on the minutes for that meeting, and open it up to questions, comments, or new suggestions.
Thank you, Chris. Frank?
I actually refrain from at this stage. I'll do the second round if there is any.
Sam?
Thanks, Chris. First, I really appreciated the work on the issue statement. I think bringing in the issue statement to each one of these really helps build this out and makes it more cohesive. I had a particular question, and that was around the reflection of employer of choice only within the marketing category. And I was wondering if there was any thought about any other places that we could reflect, not just that we want to market ourselves to potentially new employees to be an employer of choice, but also any place to reflect our desire to maintain ourselves or make sure we become an employer of choice, even for those employees who are currently with us. And so I didn't know if there's any thought about placing that into a different category as well, or maybe whether this was something that was indeed a marketing issue or went into a different part of the strategic plan.
Pete?
No, I like the statements, the issue statements as well, and I think it looks pretty good.
Katrin?
Going back to what Sam just said, I think she brought up a good point. Number one, I like the issue statements, and I think all of our edits from the special board meeting in March were incorporated very well in that draft. It looks really good. It looks well-rounded, I think. But remember, towards the end of our meeting, didn't we talk about how sort of staff is missing in this document? And there was, I think, a very brief mention or thinking out loud whether we should add something about staffing in the document. Does anyone else other than myself recall that, or am I making stuff up right now?
Katrin, I do recall that. I think that was, I don't know if that was the strategic plan. I think that was also like the talent like retention like program, which I think we talked about after, but then when we talked about it after, we said it should go into the strategic plan. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because we were talking about, succession planning and,
Mhm.
and leadership and I think because we covered that second, and then we said that should go into the strategic plan. So I understand why it might have been a little murky, but Chris, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, and to your point on this, I'm thinking that maybe one of the places we could add this in, and let me know if I'm on target, is I was thinking that I was trying to reflect on that, and that's why I put that part about marketing. I think that was a comment that Katrin, you had made about we need to be that employer that people want to go to.
Employer of
And,
choice.
but I think there's maybe another place we could add this is in the academic achievement for all students, is make a point of, we don't really say anything with regards to professional development. And maybe this is where within the academic achievement, a bullet that's related to professional development and and to retain and attract prospective employees, something to that effect. Does that make sense?
Let's do another round if that's all right with you, Chris.
Sure.
Frank?
I am not having any
You're not
good,
putting
not any good points to contribute to this
Okay.
to this agenda point, so I apologize.
No, that's fine. Sam?
No further questions right now, thanks.
Pete?
I'm good.
Katrin?
Mostly good. Thinking about what you just suggested, Chris. We could mention professional development under academic excellence. I think that could fit in there, and it seems as if we have insufficient content to justify a standalone category on staffing. Do I read that correctly? Yes.
I think it would fit in the within some of these the other areas.
Okay.
Is my take on it.
I'm fine with that.
Well, I could play around with another bullet and bring that back in May. And if there are any other ideas that people have, we can add that in. But I think the key thing is this was a document that was developed in over about 9 months time. And we definitely want to move it forward and have it in place for us for next year. So I will update that. But if anybody has any other ideas that come to you, let's put them in right now. And the hope would be maybe in May, we say it looks good, we'll bring it forward in June for approval.
All right, I think I like that, Chris. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. You are going to provide us a declaration of need for fully qualified educators. Go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna pass this one over to Casey. This is something new that normally didn't used to come to the board. And it now is required to come to the board, and it will be coming to the board each year. So this is the one for this year, and you'll be getting one in a few months that'll relate to next year, and the cycle will go on from there. So Casey, maybe you can explain it better than I just did.
That's pretty good. So in previous years, charter schools were not required to submit this declaration of need when applying for things like emergency permits or what are some of the other things, like limited assignment permits, which are things that we typically have to do since we have staff who come either from out of the state, but more regularly out of the country. So some of you might recall that a couple of years ago, I came with an application that needed to be put to the board to apply for an emergency B-clad permit for a teacher who had just arrived and then had a year to complete all of the requirements to get the actual permit. So what this document does is it states that we have a need for some number of emergency permitting for that school year. So it'll really depend on what our needs are year to year. We now are required to submit this form to the CDE, letting them know that we have this need. We've exhausted all fully credentialed people. There's no one available to fill this spot, and that's why we're applying for an emergency permit for the year. It's just a pretty straightforward form. Chris, if you want to just scroll down, it'll need to be approved by the board at the beginning of every year, but then down here, it'll list out exactly what our needs are. For this school year, we have one teacher from out of state who needs an emergency CLAD, which is the permit for teaching English learners. With the emergency permit, you then have a year to complete the testing that's required to get your actual CLAD permit to be able to teach English learners. And so that's what this document is showing that we are applying for now. The reason this is coming so late in this year is because at the beginning of the year, when I was applying for all of these documents, the CDE and the CTC sent me back letters saying, okay, we need an adjustment with this information, or we need a little bit more information here. So it's kind of a back and forth progress. And it wasn't until last month that they let me know we needed this declaration of need on file starting this year. So as Chris said, this will be something we will just need to have on file at the beginning of every school year whenever we know that we're needing to fill positions where there is no one who is fully credentialed already that is adequate to hire for our school. I hope I didn't just confuse everything with all of that information, but I can answer any questions that there might be with this.
Yeah, actually, I think that was pretty good, but Frank, go ahead.
I was wondering whether, these are like documents which need to be filled out by the teaching staff. I was wondering whether these documents could go in the consent calendar, like all ratification documents or all of these documents which we basically have no input then other than to say, yes, please go ahead and we've heard you, which is maybe important. But is there another way of like decluttering the agenda by putting them into consent?
Unfortunately, no.
I was fearing this, yeah.
We tried looking into this a couple of years ago, but unfortunately, for some of these permits, we need to have very explicit language that goes in a public meeting to be approved by the board for exactly what it is we're applying for. And sometimes it needs to be directly related to the individual that we are applying for this permit for. So because it has to be in public record, that way we're not allowed to do just a general consent.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. But that was my only comment.
Good thought.
So I guess no direct questions on this, but in the future, would we expect to see this as part of pre-meetings before the school year starts to have the correct authorizations on file and the correct declarations on file as you sketch out your planning needs?
Yes, so typically what we need this information for is for people who are coming from out of the state or out of the country. when that is happening, we know well before the start of the school year, because we've tried hiring someone who already has everything. And then we've looked outside of that. So for every single person that I've worked with since I've been at the school who's needed to get emergency permitting, we know as soon as we're ready to offer them a job, exactly what it is they need to do. And we have meetings with them. So it's all really clearly laid out for them. And then in terms of bringing it to the board, our plan for this declaration of need would be it's got to be part of the current school year. So it would have to be in that August meeting. We couldn't do it in any earlier than, well, if there was a meeting in July, we could do our July meeting, but it couldn't be in June. It has to be part of the current school year. But then the other thing with this declaration of need is we can amend it. So if something happens throughout the year and we have a different need than what we had originally, I can just amend this and then submit it again.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Katrin?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to make a motion to appoint Sam as board secretary. Is there a second?
We let her. Oh, no, you go ahead. No, we let her wait. It's like, oh, cricket. No, Pete was seconded.
Yeah, I'll second.
Thanks, Pete. All right, all in favor? Frank,
Aye, of course.
Sam,
Aye.
Pete,
Yes.
Katrin,
Yes,
and that is a yes for me as well, for the second time, and that's all Chris's fault. I just want to make that. So Pete, just for to tell you, we made this motion and approved it like at our meeting at our retreat, but Chris was like, no, it has to be listed on the agenda and ratified, and so I think Sam will appreciate that. So, all right, at this point, let's move on to the calendar and topics for upcoming board meetings. Anything to add, Frank?
No. So, but maybe, right? If the
Go
budget,
for it.
Hold on,
Yeah.
one second.
Yeah.
Maybe if this whole budget thing is getting too complicated, and to just have it set out to be like in half an hour and squeeze it into a 3-hour board discussion. Maybe we contemplate, if we're getting closer, to have like a working session around the budget and
Like a
carve it
special
out.
meeting?
Like
Yeah,
a special meeting. Like if that is so critical, and we can't get to a balanced budget, that maybe we'll spend some time outside of a regular board meeting, and rather than cramming it into this one.
I concur. I think in my history in this organization, we've always tried to cram it into regular board
Mm.
meetings, and it always goes over. And I would much rather like do it like, hunker down and have
Well,
that as the main talking point.
Yeah, and it was a pleasant meeting we had last time at the hotel, right? I got a puppy out of it.
You want to do it in person? All right, fine. I like it's a heat wave in LA, right? I can, yeah, no problem. Let's do it.
Yeah, so just this, yeah, that's my
Okay.
So-
I concur. All right. Go ahead, Chris.
Format, we could do virtual or in person. I mean, however you want to do it. But a special meeting to discuss budget is fine. I would say timing of that would be after our May board meeting, because we need as much time from the time we get that May revision. That's the key, window where it's like, okay, now we really know what the numbers are, and now we can figure that out. So we can prep for that and be ready. But I would say the end of May would be a time to do that. And I would honestly suggest keeping it in a virtual format, just for ease of getting it together. Would probably be we'd be able to get people together easier for quorum and that kind of thing. But I'm open to it either way.
Sam?
No other topics for me.
Pete?
Nothing from me.
Katrin?
nothing from me.
All right. We will now be convening to closed session. Chris, you want to stop recording and open the meeting room?
Yep. All right. Casey, can you stop recording?